The story begins on a chilly evening along Route 5, a long, lonely stretch of highway that cuts through the Pacific Northwest. The sun has just set, and the sky is a deepening shade of twilight. Ben Turner is behind the wheel of his rig, the familiar hum of the engine a comforting backdrop to the fading light. He's hauling a load of lumber to a mill up north, a routine job on a familiar route. As the miles slip by, Ben spots a figure up ahead on the side of the road, thumb outstretched in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. The man looks ordinary enough, tall, with a worn jacket and a backpack slung over one shoulder. He's standing near a stretch of dense forest, the shadows of the trees creeping across the asphalt. Ben hesitates for a moment, weighing the risks. Hitchhikers are rare on this route, and the isolation of the highway adds an element of caution. But something about the man's posture, a certain weariness perhaps, makes Ben decide to stop. He slows the truck and pulls over. The air brakes hissing as the rig comes to a halt. The hitchhiker approaches the cab with a grateful smile. Up close, he appears unremarkable, mid-30s with a scruffy beard and tired eyes. Ben rolls down the window and asks where he's headed. The man responds with a vague destination, somewhere further up the highway, and Ben nods, telling him to hop in. As the hitchhiker settles into the passenger seat, the truck rumbles back onto the highway, the road stretching out before them. The man introduces himself as Chris, thanking Ben for the ride. They exchange small talk. Chris mentions he's been traveling for a while, trying to get back to his hometown. Ben listens, keeping one eye on the road and the other on his new passenger. As the journey continues, the conversation between Ben and Chris gradually fades, replaced by an uneasy silence. Ben can't shake the feeling that something is off. Chris's responses become curt, his demeanor shifting from friendly to distant. He fidgets in his seat, his eyes darting around the cab as if searching for something. The highway grows darker as night falls, the trees on either side looming like silent sentinels. Ben tries to engage Chris in conversation again, but the hitchhiker's answers are vague, almost distracted. Ben notices that Chris's hands are shaking slightly, and there's a strange intensity in his gaze when he does look up. The unease in the cab thickens, and Ben's instincts start screaming at him that something isn't right. He glances at the clock on the dashboard. It's later than he thought, and they're still miles away from the next town. He decides it's time to part ways with his strange passenger. Ben casually mentions that he needs to stop for fuel at a gas station up ahead, thinking he can drop Chris off there. But when he suggests this, Chris's demeanor changes entirely. His eyes narrow, and his voice takes on an edge as he insists that Ben keeps driving. The shift in tone is jarring, and Ben feels a cold sweat forming on his brow. Ben tries to remain calm, but the tension in the cab is palpable. Chris's behavior becomes increasingly erratic. He mutters under his breath, occasionally glancing out the window as if expecting something to happen. His movements are jerky and his eyes seem to gleam unnaturally in the dim light of the dashboard. Ben's anxiety spikes when Chris starts asking strange, disjointed questions, things that don't make sense or seem to belong to another time and place. He asks Ben about routes that don't exist anymore, places that have long been abandoned. Ben's heart races as he realizes that Chris might not be who or what he claims to be. The radio crackles to life suddenly, playing an old, scratchy tune that Ben doesn't recognize. Chris seems to react to the music, his agitation growing as the song plays. He turns to Ben, his eyes now wide and wild, and says, "It's time." The words send a shiver down Ben's spine, and he knows he needs to act fast. Ben's mind races as he tries to figure out how to get rid of Chris without provoking him further. The truck barrels down the highway, the road a blur of darkness and shadow. Ben spots a rest area sign up ahead and decides to make a break for it. He tells Chris they're stopping, and when the hitchhiker protests, Ben pretends to comply, but subtly eases his foot off the gas. As they approach the rest area, Ben suddenly jerks the wheel, pulling the truck into the parking lot with a screech of tires. He slams on the brakes, throwing Chris off balance, and in that split second, Ben flings open the driver's side door and leaps out of the cab. Chris recovers quickly, his face contorting with anger. He lunges for Ben, but Ben is faster. He grabs a heavy wrench from the tool compartment on the side of the truck and swings it at Chris, who dodges with inhuman speed, his movements now unnaturally fluid and predatory. Ben backs away, keeping the truck between him and Chris, who circles the vehicle with an eerie calm. The rest area is deserted, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp. Ben's heart pounds as he realizes that Chris is no longer pretending to be human. His eyes glow with a cold, malevolent light, and his movements are more like those of a predator than a man. Chris taunts Ben, his voice distorted, echoing unnaturally in the empty night. He speaks of things beyond this world, of powers and forces that Ben can't comprehend. Ben knows he's dealing with something far more dangerous than he could have imagined, and he steels himself for the fight of his life. Chris lunges at Ben again, moving with terrifying speed. Ben swings the wrench, connecting with Chris's arm, but the blow seems to have little effect. Chris laughs, a sound that sends a chill down Ben's spine and closes the distance between them. Desperate, Ben throws the wrench at Chris and runs for the truck, slamming the door behind him and locking it. Inside the cab, Ben frantically starts the engine, his hands trembling as he shifts into gear. Chris is at the window, pounding on the glass with unnatural strength, but Ben floors the gas pedal, sending the truck lurching forward. The tires squeal as the rig barrels out of the rest area and back onto the highway. The truck races down the highway, Ben's heart pounding in his chest. He glances in the rearview mirror, expecting to see Chris chasing after him, but the road behind is empty. The only sound is the roar of the engine and the blood rushing in his ears. Ben doesn't slow down until he's miles away, the rest area and the nightmare he encountered far behind him. He pulls into a brightly lit truck stop, surrounded by other rigs and people, and finally lets out the breath he didn't realize he was holding. Shaking, Ben steps out of the cab, his legs weak and unsteady. He checks the truck, expecting to see signs of damage or evidence of Chris's attack, but there's nothing. No dents, no cracks in the windows, nothing to suggest that what he experienced was real. Ben heads inside the truck stop, the warmth and light a stark contrast to the cold fear that still grips him. He orders a coffee, trying to calm his nerves, but the encounter has left him deeply shaken. As he sits at the counter, he hears the low murmur of other truckers talking about strange sightings on the highway, and he realizes that what he encountered might not have been unique. The story ends with Ben back on the road, the sun rising in the distance. He's alive, but the memory of the hitchhiker lingers, a reminder that not everything on the road is what it seems. He glances at the empty passenger seat, grateful to be alone, but the fear that something might still be following him never fully fades.